Sibling relationships are essential to how Avatar The Last Airbender characterizes community during times of upheaval and uncertainty. The world does not have these stable familial units because it is so war torn, because there has been so much anxiety, because there has not been a clear sense of futurity. Futurity is not just this abstract idea of the future, but the idea that there can be a future, the idea that what is can have some connection to what will be. There is this sense of renewal, there is this sense of growth and burgeoning. Unlike in this world where so much is precarious, where family can be torn apart without a moment's notice. Nietzsche talks about humanity as being a special creature because we have the ability to make promises. Now, what kinds of promises is Nietzsche talking about, and how do they relate to Katara and Sokka or Zuko and Azula, the two pairs of siblings that I am going to be discussing in this video? He does not mean promises simply in the sense that you make on the playground when you are 8 years old and you say that you're going to be friends with this other kid forever, or even necessarily the promises made in a ceremony like marriage, although that's a bit closer. This idea that you're bonded to this person and you promise to be with them ostensibly forever, or as long as you two live. What Nietzsche talks about is both more general and more demanding. By promise, he means the ability to establish some level of certainty regarding the connection between the present and the future. This, for Nietzsche, is what separates us from other animals. It's not that other animals don't have basic patterns of repetition in their lives. They do, of course. Birds fly south for the winter and then fly back later. Many animals have such migratory patterns. But the ability to have an actual specific personal desire, express that desire, and thus then have the ability to later make that desire reality through a level of commitment and determination is, for Nietzsche, ultimately satisfying, and it is what makes humanity special and worth caring about. I can say, I want to achieve this job in this city, and I can make steps toward making that happen. Careful steps, perhaps, slow steps, perhaps, but steps nonetheless with the idea of the end goal in my mind. But something like that is not possible during a time of such fundamental upheaval. Communities are ripped apart, and so are individuals. The individual mind becomes transient. It becomes flooded with all of this unease. It fundamentally does not cohere together into a unified whole. And thus, these deeper networks of connection, of community, become especially important. Family connection is, in general, very important in Avatar. Even someone like Aang, who does not really grow up in a traditional family unit, nonetheless viewed the monks as family growing up, and he views Team Avatar as his other family in the course of Avatar The Last Airbender. But sibling relationships are particularly notable for Avatar because there is this ostensible kind of equality. It is not simply like the father and the child, where there is ostensibly a kind of power dynamic, a kind of hierarchy, and there is certainly this difference in experience. We see both good fathers and bad fathers in Avatar The Last Airbender. bad fathers are people like Ozai, or to a lesser extent, someone like Tofstad, who do not respect the individuality of their children and instead try to impress upon their children certain specific and limited ideas of who these kids should be. But even for someone like Hakoda, who from all appearances seems to be a generous and thoughtful and helpful father figure, he nonetheless has a different experience of the world than Katara and Sokka. He's the one who goes off to fight in the war, they're the ones who stay home. This division fundamentally rankles Sokka, who wants to be this grand, grown-up, mature warrior, but it is a division that exists nonetheless. Siblings in Avatar at least have this potential for closeness that could provide some level of comfort or some level of reassurance or at least some level of togetherness during a time of such disquiet, of such fragmented, broken, deracinated unease. In Sokka and Katara, we see the example of a sibling dynamic that, while far from perfect, nonetheless demonstrates two people who are willing to look beyond their superficial differences in personalities and desires to commit to this kind of closeness and this kind of intimacy between them. In Zuko and Azula, we see the opposite. We see a family that is more broken even than Katara and Sokka's family. And we see that they do have this shared experience. They do have this isolation and fissure in their identity and their self-concepts that come from having this demanding and austere father who cares far more about his own ambitions and his grandiose dreams for the Fire Nation than he does about his children, and a mother who was loving but ultimately left. She didn't want to leave, but there's still that gap. They are possibly the only two people who can really understand each other. Obviously, Zuko can try to form relations with others, as he does quite often, even back in Season 2. There are 3 wonderful examples of that attempt by Zuko to form this kind of closeness with a young woman who is about his age. There is episode 202, when he is treated to a delicious meal and some good advice by that girl, and nonetheless he betrays her. There is the date in the Tales of Ba Sing Se episode that provides Zuko with some degree of satisfaction and relief, but ultimately not as much as he desires, and he can't really make that kind of commitment. He's not emotionally prepared or stable enough to. And then there's his very intimate scene with Katara at the end of Season 2, where he does open up and share his experiences, and he does make this kind of connection. But then he betrays her. All of these connections are partial, and they're partial for a lot of reasons, and I don't want to imply that Zuko cannot form a connection with anyone who does not share his exact experiences. That would be a fundamentally pessimistic and even nihilistic view of the world. But no one he knows really has the exact same experiences as him. No one he knows really knows exactly what he went through. Iroh is close, but again, Iroh is a mentor figure. He is not haughty, far from it. He is very earthy and very humble. But he comes to Zuko as a kind of teacher and guide, not as an equal. Azula could possibly be that equal, except their relationship is so tortured and so warped by their experiences growing up, by Azula's own megalomania and her own cold scheming, and by Zuko's uncertainty regarding whether he can really make any sort of connection with his sister. The two pairs of siblings are parallels, and Azula particularly is kind of a dark parody of Katara. They're both about the same age, and they're both younger sisters, but those are superficial parallels. What's more interesting is that they are both the more intense one of their siblings. They both have a greater degree of darkness in them. And they both feel isolated at times because of that darkness, because of that desire to constantly strive for some sort of relief, some sort of satisfaction that they have a difficult time getting. Both because of how fragmented and warped the world in which they explore is, and because of how inscrutable their psyches are even to themselves. They both have these relationships to their moms that define them, and that are not altogether positive. For Katara, her mother deeply loved her and sacrificed her life for her, but the sacrifice left Katara with a capacious, cavernous degree of guilt that leads to Katara committing unsavory actions and almost killing her mother's murderer and surrendering to that liquid, vibrating darkness inside her. Azula's relationship with her mom is weirdly a photo negative of that. She resents her mother. She believes her mother didn't love her or care about her at all. But this is, in reality, projection in the truest psychological sense of that term. She has a lot of feelings about herself that are not quite self-loathing, but are certainly in that region, and yet she projects them onto her mom. She wants to believe that her mom did not really love her at all, and that thus Azula's emphasis on control, on power, on domination is right and just. In reality, her mom did love her. She loved her a lot. And Azula does not know how to deal with this. It is an unexpected, inconvenient light, and she does not know how to accommodate it into her dark, warped viewpoint. Zuko and Azula ultimately do not have that level of connection that Katara and Sokka have, except maybe tenuously, momentarily. Sokka is always there for Katara. He accepts that Katara is a different person from him. He accepts that maybe he will never really be able to understand her. And to a certain level, he also knows that although he really loved his mother, Katara's feelings for her were very deep and very profound. And that Katara just, as a whole, feels things much more strongly than him. He accepts that, and in a way, as he admits to Toph in 307, he kind of depends on that. In 303, the Painted Lady episode, he is willing to be with Katara and support her even if he disagrees with her. And we see the same thing all the way back in the Imprisoned episode, 106, I believe. Zuko and Azula's relationship is never really like that. There is this one brief, beautiful moment in the beach episode where there is the promise of a kind of connection, where Azula understands how depressing and miserable a place like the old beach house is for Zuko. She understands, because of the weight of those shared memories, how he must be feeling, and she extends an offer to him to get away from that. I wish, as someone who cares a lot about these characters, that we got to see more moments like that between them. But that we don't is ultimately a sign of how far they are from the non-ideal but still productive idea of a sibling relationship that we see in Katara and Sokka, and how much poorer Zuko and Azula are because they don't have that. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, if you want to see more videos like this. Keep walking Avatar. Great show. Tune in soon for the next analysis. We'll be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.